Bereavement is the state of grieving the death of a loved one with whom an individual has shared a relationship. Grieving the death of a loved one presents significant challenges, regardless of the bereaved person's age or life circumstances. Grief can be described as the emotions that are felt after a loss, such as emotional numbness, disbelief, separation anxiety, despair, sadness, and loneliness. Some of the stress symptoms may include a sense of hopelessness and defeat, apathy, a loss of meaning, and growing desolation. As the name loss implies, the concept of loss is something that had been present but is no longer there. There are many types of grief, and I will identify 3 of them. There is normal grief, and these are emotions that are normal and expected, even though the bereavement may be a challenging time for most persons. Disenfranchised grief is a term coined by Doka, and he suggests that there are losses that are not acknowledged, or the griever is excluded and or socially defined as incapable of grief. In these circumstances, when the loss is not acknowledged, sometimes there is little or no social recognition of the person's sense of loss or even need to mourn. These persons who are not socially recognized may be the very old or the very young, or the relationship to the person who has died is not recognized by others in the social milieu, such as those persons who may be step-parents, homosexuals, an extramarital affair, and unmarried persons. Children and adolescents fall within the first 2 categories. That is, usually their loss is not acknowledged, and there is the belief held by many persons that they are incapable of experiencing grief. The 3rd type of grief is complicated grief. This grief describes the abnormal reactions to loss and may include chronic grief reactions which can disable persons and lead to phobias, physical symptoms, and deviant behaviors. Both disenfranchised grief and complicated grief, if left unresolved, may lead to social isolation and exacerbate feelings of guilt, depression, and anger. Now let's look at stages of grief. There are several stages to identify grief according to Kubler-Ross, such as shock and denial, pining, reorganization, and recovery. These stages are usually followed in a particular sequence for bereavement recovery. Worden has identified a set of tasks for the bereaved person, such as accepting the reality of death, dealing with the emotional impact of the loss, and adjusting to an environment in which the deceased person is absent. In continuing bonds theory, some people develop internal connections or continuing bonds which seem to help them adapt more readily to life without their loved one. And these connections could be dreams, waking memories, and personal objects which they keep that have belonged to their deceased loved one. Meaning reconstruction posits that meaning is the central feature of grieving, a process which is deeply personal and intricately social, and where talking about the loss is central to reconstructing meaning. The United Nations Human Rights Council in 2013 declared that children and adolescents who grieve are the hidden victims who face a higher risk of mental health issues, school dropouts, eating disorders, and loss of self-esteem. Children younger than 5 years old see death as reversible, and by the age of 7, there is a lack of emotional maturity to deal with it. With children over 7 years, there is the fear that other significant persons in their life will also die. Studies have shown that children who have lost a parent to death had greater levels of emotional and behavioral problems than children who had not experienced this type of loss. So that parental death is a risk factor for the development of psychiatric and behavioral problems when these children later become adults, especially if they did not work through the task of grieving when they were children. The particular social and cultural upbringing of the adolescent leads us to believe that the adolescent would view his or her grieving experiences through specific lens. That is, adolescent grief does not occur in a vacuum, but the experience is rooted in a wider social, cultural, and historical context. Adolescents, you see, have a greater ability to understand all the possibilities of life as they plan ahead, set goals, and work out long-term strategies. These plans are often constructed on hypothetical thoughts of success and happiness as perceived by social media and its conceptions of what life should be. So that when death comes in the form of a parental death or of a loved one, this can seriously disarm the adolescent and create mixed feelings of the afterlife and acceptance of the conclusion of life. Often, an adolescent will deny feelings of sadness or grief in response to the death of a parent. And this denial is, at times, a way of protecting themselves from becoming overwhelmed and not wanting others to see their emotions. The bereavement period can often serve as a catalyst for adolescent growth in many areas of his or her life. If this spurt period is handled carefully by the significant others in a teenager's life, this can be a period of positive renewal and growth. Within the school, students whose grief is complicated during bereavement may exhibit poor academic performance, indiscipline, and even psychological problems such as depression, isolation, and when these are not well addressed, it causes serious problems. Kopp states that the death of a parent or a close loved one of the adolescent is one of the most traumatic and stressful experiences of life. And within a school, bereaved students should be offered appropriate social and psychological support in which to rechannel their emotional energy so that they can concentrate on their schoolwork. This grieving process that follows death sometimes have a negative impact on their physical, social, and emotional well-being. So that the responsibility for the welfare of children within a school setting rests not only with the parents and teachers of these children, but also with the various professionals that they encounter. These are persons such as guidance counselors, school psychologists, and other human resource personnel. Schools, therefore, are in a unique position to help grieving children, as schools, after all, aid in the secondary socialization of children and adolescents, assisting parents in their development. In Trinidad and Tobago, as in many countries in the world, the aspect of grieving is and continues to be trivialized by educators, with significant effects on children and adolescents. These effects include academic underachievement, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, dropout rates, and emotional and behavioral disorders. If schools pressure students to resume normal school activities without a chance to deal with the emotional pain that they are facing, it may prompt additional negative problems while they are at school. These views further underscore the need for a module on grief and loss in teacher education and student pedagogy globally. In conclusion, whilst every grief experience is unique, there are characteristics that would determine whether grief is complicated or whether grief is normal. These are the circumstances surrounding the death, the relationship with the deceased, and the availability of support and the coping mechanisms of the child and the adolescent.